Psychedelics today. This is Joe Moore, joined by Amanda Reiman. Amanda, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I can't wait to dig in here. I forget how we got connected, but I like this angle of work you're up to here. Really kind of a cool trajectory around people being able to work with plants on their own, including growing, developing their own relationships on their own terms. Maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, but I don't know. How do we want to describe my personal plants or your project that you're up to?
I have been growing my own cannabis for over 25 years. I started in a very small closet with a high pressure sodium light in Chicago in the mid 90s, where it was very, very much illegal. I say, I'm a white lady, so my risk wasn't quite as high as others, but it was still something you weren't supposed to do. And we didn't have the internet. So there was no connecting with communities of growers online. There was no subreddit. There was no way to really understand how to grow. I read a lot of books. I read Ed Rosenthal's books. I read High Times magazine. And I spent a good couple years trying to figure out how to grow cannabis and felt very isolated. I was doing it for medical purposes. I had been diagnosed with arthritis. I was trying to find alternatives to pharmaceuticals. And I really thought that growing my own would be a great way not only to get a product that I knew was good because I grew it myself. And of course, I was buying on the unregulated market, but also because I wanted to have a connection with my source of healing. And I felt that the pharmaceutical option was very removed. You were coming to the doctor, getting a pill, putting it in your body, and not really thinking much about it. And I wanted to take a different approach. So growing my own cannabis became a way of healing myself as well as connecting with the plants. And I found it to be a really miraculous opportunity and process. And I wanted others to also have that opportunity. And I felt like there was a huge barrier to entry. It was really interesting. In the unregulated cannabis days, it was hard for growers to say who they were. They couldn't brand themselves. They couldn't come out of the closet, so to speak. And so one of the ways they tried to show off their prowess was by talking about how much they knew about growing and how technical they were getting and the very specific things they were doing that made their cannabis better than everyone else's. And while I appreciate that level of sophistication, the reality is it's a plant. It needs soil and water and sun. And so I wanted to bring people in, a lot of them women, who were very put off and overwhelmed by the idea of entering that kind of cannabis grower culture, and show them that there's this whole other side to cultivating cannabis that does have to do with the connection to the source of your medicine. And I found that there's been a lot of really positive reaction from people as the laws are changing and people are having more opportunities to grow their own. People who don't even consume cannabis are finding joy in growing cannabis and giving it to their friends who do consume. And so that's really what personal plants is about. It's taking a step back from that kind of culture of high level sophistication and bringing it back to the joys of gardening.
I love that. And are you working most specifically with cannabis?
I do work specifically with cannabis because that's what I know. I've had a relationship with the cannabis plant for a very long time, but we encourage people to grow all kinds of entheogens. A lot of folks don't know that it is completely legal to grow an ayahuasca vine, to grow a wachuma cactus, to grow chacruna and datura, and that there's a lot of plants you see every single day that contain chemicals like DMT, ice plants, passion flower, morning glories. And so on our personal plants site, we do work with a sacred garden in Oakland, and they produce seeds and cuttings of these plants. And you can purchase sacred garden kits so that you can grow these plants at home. And again, not even thinking about the idea of consumption, because obviously with some of these plants, it is illegal to take the chemical from inside of them and to put it inside of you. So we really focus again on this relationship building with the plants and better understanding them. And then once you've built that relationship, I believe that consumption is going to be way more beneficial to your overall health and well-being.
It's beautiful. Yeah, just like I do get the sense that if people are growing their own mushrooms or something, there's like a certain level of understanding that just develops by being with it. I can't say it's super duper substantial, but I feel like it's important to consider.
Well, I'm in awe of mushrooms. I mean,
Mm,
that's what I get when I grow mushrooms is that I'm in awe. I'm in awe how quickly they grow. I mean, you could
yeah.
almost see them growing in front of
Mm,
your eyes. I was growing just some oyster mushrooms in a bag on my counter, and I swear I went to bed and I came back the next day and I had a gigantic shroom bloom. I don't know what happened overnight, but it's really they're magical beings. So, the growing the mushrooms, cannabis is beautiful and it's artistic and it's just a very luxurious looking plant. And mushrooms are just fascinating and awe-inspiring.
mm-hmm. Totally. It's it's a very interesting scene that's developing in California, like Oakland specifically, having effectively above ground markets for scheduled federally plants, and that's extraordinary that Oakland has been able to pull together and pull this off the way they have. It's
Yes, but not
wonderful.
surprising. Not
Mm,
surprising because, when I moved to the Bay Area in 2002 from Chicago, I became a medical cannabis patient. I went to the Oakland Cannabis Buyers Club to get my card. And then I went to a dispensary around the corner called Care to make my first purchase. And this was 2002. So, no state law, no legal state medical system, even in California, just Prop 215 and my doctor's rec. And I remember going into my first dispensary after spending so much time in the Midwest and literally being speechless at seeing the fact that I could take my time, look at different products, smell them. Back in those days, we were allowed to actually smell the products. And that experience showed me that that is how it should be. And so seeing this replicate with mushrooms does not surprise me at all because Oakland has always seen that bringing these things above ground is way safer than keeping them underground. And Oakland was really on the forefront, Oakland, San Francisco, and Berkeley, when it came to medical cannabis in California, where we didn't even have, like I said, a state medical cannabis system, still went through the process of establishing licensure for dispensaries in their communities.
mm, that's unbelievable. Yeah. So this is obviously a hotly debated topic, but how do you like to think about distribution points and like growing and all this stuff? Like it's hotly debated. I would prefer to see as little regulation as possible, other than perhaps safe supply when that's relevant. So, for instance, LSD, etc. But we're talking about plants here. Do you have any kind of vision around plants like that would be super ideal in terms
I
of like?
do.
Yeah, go ahead.
I do. I actually wrote an article about this several years ago for an academic journal about these two paths of cannabis regulation and
Hmm.
how a lot of times we act as if they're mutually exclusive. It
So
either
medical
has
versus recreational, you mean?
well, not even
Yeah.
recreational. I would say a pharmaceutical versus herbal medicine. So,
Oh,
the
sure.
idea of having a Sativex or a Pedialex, which is an extract of cannabis that's turned into an FDA approved medicine, I do believe in that because I know there are some people that will only access cannabis in that form. I know that insurance companies will reimburse for medicines in that form. And I'm not saying it's impossible to push whole plant medicine through the FDA process. And we can talk more about the work that Sue Sisley is doing in that avenue. But I do think that there's a place for cannabinoid based pharmaceutical medications. However, at the same time, we have to protect the individual's right to grow their own plants and put them in their mouth if they should choose to do so. We have to protect the right to share plant medicine with others in your community in a non commercial space. And we have to make room for safe, regulated access of plants. We already do that, right? So you can already go to an herbal store and buy herbs in bulk. Those herbs go through a regulatory process, but they're still there in bulk, and I can buy them and take them home. I'd love to see us be able to do that with cannabis. I think there's really no reason to put it in these tiny little jars that create a ton of waste when it should just be bulk, like any other spice. So I think that there are ways to ensure that that is safe without really giving way to this industrialized machine of capitalism, which ends up just being at the cost of human health and safety because it doesn't become about that anymore. It becomes about profit margins and it becomes about revenue. And I think that's probably the biggest threat to plant medicine, the way we've seen it be a threat to healthcare. I mean, the fact that healthcare is a business means that what's best for the people is never going to be number one. And so if we create a plant medicine system that also upholds those same values, I'm afraid the people will lose. So I don't mind the idea of creating pharmaceutical products that reach very specific populations. But other than that, I think the minimal regulation to ensure that what we put in our bodies is safe if bought in a commercial environment, but a lot of social sharing and personal cultivation.
Yeah. Do you have an opinion? I'm sure you have an opinion on this. So, all right, yay, cannabis is legal to grow at home, except, 2 plants per adult or 6 plants per adult, depending on where you're at, right? Like, this is not exactly what we expected when we were told it was going legal.
No, yeah, I hear what you're saying. And I think a couple things about that. One is I get it. I get why they're doing that. I mean, the cannabis unregulated market still exists, especially here in California. It is very, very robust. So I understand that the idea of limiting personal cultivation is really around not seeing diversion into the unregulated market by allowing people to grow enough that would be commercially viable to sell. I also understand the desire to cap cultivation limits for personal use because of neighborhoods. Cannabis smells. As much as I'd like to say it doesn't, it is an attractive plant for people to want to steal. Most of us who have been growing cannabis outdoors at one point or another has had a plant ripped off by somebody close to harvest. So I'm not saying that there are not any risks to having cannabis growing in residential areas or growing in plain sight, or that people wouldn't try to skirt the limits in order to divert into the unregulated market. All of those things are true. However, how true are they? And how often do they occur? And with what intensity? And that we really don't know. We do know that people used the limits in California under medical in order to divert into the unregulated market. We know that was happening. But does stopping people from growing as much as they want really stop that from happening? Or does it just make those people get a bit smarter about how they're hiding what they're doing? So I understand the logic behind it. I just don't think we have the data to support whether that logic bears out in the real world. I will also say that people don't always understand that you get a lot of cannabis from one plant. I mean, I can't tell you how many people I know in California who have said, Amanda, I grew way too much. Like this plant, I put it out in my backyard and it got to be 6 feet high. And now I have like pounds and pounds of weed and I don't even know what to do with it. So I would say don't underestimate how much can be produced from one plant if you do it well. So we'll figure it out. Here in California, we can have 6. In Vermont, I believe I can have 4 mature or 2 mature and 4 immature, or 4 mature, 4 immature. But you also in Vermont get that per person per household, whereas in California, it's just per household. So you'll see, I mean, we'll figure it out. The laws will kind of even out once we have more data on kind of what's really warranted. But we are seeing all of these cute little self-contained grow systems pop up that you just kind of plug in your living room and it grows a weed plant for you. And the reality is, for most consumers, that's going to be enough. Not for the heaviest consumers, but for most consumers.
Mm-hmm. No, I like that. And, this, there's always a tension between people who are so in and deep in and relative to people who have not even, purchased or even held cannabis in their hand or something, right? So very different bodies. So I think I like your approach here. It's optimistic. Over time, we're going to see really improved stuff. But, this is an iterative process. People, certain things are more permanent than others, right? Like rock movements, like tectonic plate shifts, which are a little more permanent than like a law that goes into place, right?
Well, I think when you talk about permanent, like what's going to stick with cannabis that we see now, there's definitely some things. Age, right? It's going to be 21. Medical may stay at 18, but the reality is the US wants to control a standardized age limit for cannabis, just like they do with alcohol. So I do not see that changing. I think there'll be some questions about whether it should be 18, just like there is with drinking, right? Should it be 18? But I don't see that changing. I think there will always be taxes. So I think we'll argue about how much those should be and where those should be placed. But this idea that cannabis will be an untaxed commodity, I don't ever see that happening. I do think we'll adjust the sin tax. Sin taxes, or excise taxes as they're known, are usually created to offset the cost to society of the product or behavior that's being taxed. And so when we started legalizing cannabis, the excise tax was placed very high because people were making assumptions based on models from tobacco and alcohol, which have very high cost to society. People get into DUIs. We have to pay for their medical care. People get emphysema after being lifelong smokers. We have to pay for their medical care. But I think what we're going to find when we're a few more years down the road with this is that cannabis does not have the same costs to society as these other substances, and therefore very high excise taxes really aren't warranted. The question then becomes, have we become so dependent on the revenue from these taxes that it becomes very hard to put the genie back in the bottle, even when we have the data that supports that they shouldn't be that high? You know, we love money and taxes in this country, so I think it's going to be hard to make the case that we want you to stop taking as much money as you are from cannabis regulation.
Mm, very interesting. And do you see any parallels there with like maybe 5-10 years out in psychedelics?
I think psychedelics are going to be a different beast. And I think the main reason for this is the difference in consumption rates and consumption patterns. You know, cannabis is consumed more like alcohol, but even more so. I mean, there are more people who are regular daily consumers of cannabis relative to the entire consuming population than there are people that are regular daily consumers of alcohol. So when you're looking at cannabis commerce, it fits very well into a capitalism model because you have very frequent, intense consumers, and then you have a whole batch of moderate consumers, but are still fairly regular. And then you have your irregular consumers. With psychedelics, people aren't consuming with such intensity or regularity. And the number that are a far smaller percentage of the overall consumption population than are with cannabis. So how capitalism adjusts to that, I'm not sure. What it might look like is that instead of all of the money and kind of the effort going towards the product and the supply chain, more effort and money might be going towards ancillary services like the therapists, the social sharing circles, the environments that people create in which to use psychedelics safely. I would see those as being actually more lucrative than thinking I'm going to have a mushroom chocolate brand. Because even if people who eat mushroom chocolates, like how often are they eating it? They're not eating it like 7, 8, 9 times a day, like people who smoke a lot of weed are consuming. I think there's a slightly different story to be told there on the microdose level, because there are people that are going to be looking to establish regular routines of microdose. So I could see, you know, microdose psilocybin or LSD companies being a little bit more like cannabis nutraceutical companies when it comes to the way that they package and promote. But the people that are looking for more of the macro, they're not consuming on the same level as intensive cannabis consumers.
Right. Right. Yeah. Even on the microdose, it's just such a small quantity.
Well, now,
Yeah. Right. That's a good point.
I mean, I think that's where you're probably going to see the biggest growth. Because even when we talk about the use of kind of macro dose psychedelics for therapeutic purposes, that is a very, very small segment of the population that's going to enter into that, either by choice or because the laws where they live only allow like medical cannabis for very certain conditions under very certain circumstances for people to access these treatments. But I could see microdosing becoming like CBD, where it's something that everyone's kind of doing or talking about. You know, the kind of the standard protocol with psilocybin is 1 day on, 2 days off. So it isn't as regular as maybe CBD or some of the other things. but it is something that people establish as a lifestyle protocol. And I think that's really the difference, is once it becomes part of your lifestyle versus just an event, then it becomes more viable for kind of your typical capitalism model.
Mm, that's interesting. Hmm. Yeah, like my long vision, and just to prove like the point, I don't exactly mean it, but like I'm not really done until I'm buying LSD at something like Walmart without a prescription. And like that's the extreme I'm going for, but I know it's probably not going to happen within 20 years. So very long vision, or I don't know, maybe you think it will.
Well, I'm just trying to think about why wouldn't it? That's what I always
Mm.
think. So, like, what would
Ah,
stop that from happening? Well, it would have to be federally legal, and they would have to have it in a way where it couldn't be easily stolen. Because with alcohol, it's kind of hard to steal like a bottle of liquor, but
right.
stealing like a little vial of LSD is really easy. So they'd probably have to have it under one of those locked cabinet things where they come and get it out for you and walk you to the checkout and check it out for you there. But if they could do that as a way to age gate and as a way to reduce the likelihood of theft, and it was federally legal, like I don't really see why that would be so different than them serving alcohol or selling alcohol.
Right. Well, we know the at least the harm profile is a lot lower
Oh,
with LSD.
absolutely.
So
Yeah.
why not? And it'd be fascinating if like insurance, like actuarials are the ones that like drive this. They're like, oh, actually, you need way less insurance to sell LSD than alcohol. So that would be
That would be
fascinating, the
interesting.
dynamic. Um,
Absolutely. Well, we're going to start to see that with cannabis already because now we're seeing cannabis event licenses and things like that happening, and you have to get event insurance for those licenses. So it'll be really interesting to see how the event insurance for cannabis events will compare to alcohol and whether the cannabis industry will have an argument that the rates should not be comparable because there is a much higher risk for an event that alcohol is being served versus an event where cannabis is being served.
mm, yeah, and I think for people who aren't in business like this or in an event space, like insurance is so core to a lot of business decisions. So once insurance can start insuring interesting scenarios like this, you're going to see some very interesting market dynamics as a result, I think.
Oh,
So, like
absolutely.
retreat centers having insurance plans, for instance, for
Oh, yeah.
liabilities.
Yep. Oh, yeah. I mean, I think the retreat, I mean, and that's where I'm talking about like these ancillary businesses and how I feel like somebody who really wants to get in on this space is going to be working more on the experience side because, that's really what's going to be the key to people having a good a good opportunity to get involved with these plants as they become legal is ensuring the setting in which they're being used is supportive and fantastic. And I think that's where there's going to be a lot of opportunity, whether you're talking about a community center in Oakland that hosts ceremony, or you're talking about a retreat center in some far off place where you go for a week. And, they already have that around ayahuasca. And so I think we're just going to see more and more of that. Especially now, people are looking for travel experiences that are going to be really intense and really life changing because no one's been going anywhere for years. So I think the time is really right to introduce these types of opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. So, can you tell me a little bit about your connection to Sacred Garden community?
Sure. So I'll explain the Sacred Garden community is an entity, and we are not affiliated with that entity. Bob Otis, who is the founder of the Sacred Garden community, is also the garden steward for the physical Sacred Garden in Oakland. And so we source our plants and cuttings, our seeds from Bob and Carrie, who are the garden stewards of the actual physical garden. And we offer discounts and opportunities to get plants for the Sacred Garden community and the people that are part of that community. But we are not officially linked to the Sacred Garden community as an entity, just the physical space and Bob.
Awesome, cool. Yeah, I got to meet some of the team at this conference in Oak. Where was I? Salt Lake City the other day, and I was pretty impressed. I've had one or two phone calls with Bob. Um, Always fun.
Oh,
um,
absolutely. I mean,
yeah,
and that's the thing about this field is that it's the people that make it. And all you have to do is spend a little bit of time at a psychedelics conference, or I wouldn't even say a cannabis conference, but maybe a cannabis conference 10 years ago. And you understand that people who are drawn to this because of the types of people that they are. They see beyond today. They're very futuristic. They're very visionary. They don't have a lot of patience for things in the now that aren't working, and they're constantly thinking about how
Oh
to
yeah.
make them better. And I really appreciate that. I appreciated it about the cannabis space when I first got involved here over 20 years ago. And now I'm appreciating it about the NFT Web3 space, which I think is kind of where we're going with technology. And so, just like the early days of cannabis, I'm thinking, how do we use these new tools and platforms to get even more people engaged and involved with these healing plants and all that they can do?
I want to make some jokes, but honestly, like I think this might be the first time somebody's heard NFT or Web3 would be on this episode with you. So there's going to be a few of them. Can you like describe it briefly?
Sure.
Both Web3 and crypto. For context, I did 20 years in software. I'm pretty well up to speed on all this stuff, but
Okay. Well, you tell me if my really quick and dirty explanation
you
makes
got it.
sense then. So Web 1.0 was very much the user was just passive. It was information on a screen that you got, and then you had to go do something with it. You couldn't shop online, but you could look and see what a store had to offer online and then go to the store and buy those things. Web 2.0 introduced this interaction between the consumer and the internet. So being able to shop online, social media, the way we're able to chat and interact with each other. However, with this came, as a lot of us know, a huge centralization through companies like Facebook and others that really just existed to now gather data from consumers and use our data points in order to sell ad space and other things and to manipulate us into buying those things. I do credit the youth because they came along growing up with the internet and asking, why the hell is this like this? This doesn't make any sense to us. And so the idea became, how can we decentralize the internet so that each individual person has ownership of their data, has ownership of how that data is used and how they interact and how they show up on the internet without that being manipulated by some centralized force. So that's really the concept behind Web3. And it's being integrated in a time when virtual reality, augmented reality, and other ways of interacting with the internet are also coming online. So I have an Oculus. I work out in the metaverse several times a week, and I absolutely love it. And so thinking about new ways of interacting and of bringing those experiences and immersive experiences into the living room is kind of what's being developed hardware wise alongside Web3. Now, NFTs are basically just a digital token that shows that you own something, and that ownership is registered on the blockchain, which is a transparent ledger of who owns what in the digital space. NFTs can be just a ticket that gives you all the rights and privileges of a community that ticket is a part of. It can be a piece of art that you're buying with the idea that it's going to increase in value over time. Or what's most common is it's some combination of the two, where the art is supposed to have value as the token, and then also the utility of the token being able to access membership rights to a certain community. How is that?
You did great, I think. And
I've been practicing.
to extend it just a little bit, it can also be physical assets too, right? Like this, NFT means that you actually own this car or painting or whatever it is,
Correct.
right?
So like your house deed
Yeah,
can be an NFT that's registered on the blockchain that shows that you have all the rights and privileges of ownership of this piece of land or this dwelling.
right. And let's lay out a couple scenarios. I want to do a little thing on environment afterwards, but like, so for instance, look at a lot of the companies out there in psychedelics that have had so many issues with banking, social media advertising, and so much stuff like that. Like Double Blind's been shut down so many times on
Oh,
Instagram. It's
yeah.
crazy. And, I'm super careful and paranoid about everything. So,
So
I
that's why you
haven't
put
been.
psychedelics in the name of the podcast.
Yeah, right.
I get
Yeah, yeah. Sabotage. I guess I like paranoia. Maybe that's it.
it.
Um, I have the Fox Mulder wall art right there. I want to
Yes.
believe. So it's kind of the patron saint. in some ways. So yeah, like we can co-own companies through NFTs. We can co-own records and like album projects through it. It's fascinating what we can do. I'm told in there's a number of interesting psychedelic projects going around protecting underground circles. And, effectively, if you get enough complaints and you get enough people in your little NFT circle, you can get booted off the island if there's enough negative complaints. So kind of an interesting self-regulated model. And, we don't need permission anymore. We can send money across the world in moments for 25 cents or less if you do it right. I've had a gazillion problems with the modern banking system in the last year. 50% of my wires failed.
Well, it's getting really bad. I mean, my friend Dr. Sue Sisley, who has the Scottsdale Research Institute, where she's one of the only researchers in the country that has a Schedule I license to grow cannabis and mushrooms for research. She has it from the DEA, and yet her bank account was shut down last October by Bank of America for no reason.
That was a big deal.
Yeah,
and she's in very good standing.
Yeah. So. I mean, you have the DEA behind you saying this woman is allowed to grow cannabis and mushrooms. Like, if you don't have that, I mean, all of our bank accounts are in jeopardy.
Totally. So, I think there's a great reason to not trust these bigger modern institutions. And, crypto helps show us the way in a lot of senses. So it also allows for freedom and autonomy that the banking system will never allow. So,
oh, absolutely. I just saw a study that was looking at Wells Fargo mortgage application, and half of all African American applications were rejected. When it was the rate, I don't remember what it was for whites, but it was much, 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 much lower. So we forget there's so many barriers put in place through institutional racism and classism that don't give people access to the same financial benefits from banking as other people. And so I think that crypto is an attempt to kind of democratize finance where, like you said, like anyone can send anything to anyone. It's up to you to decide where you're going to invest and what coins you think are going to do well. Now, of course, I will also say, if I had a ton of money and I didn't have to work and I could just sit around all day with my crypto advisor, then, I'd probably be making bank. So of course, like anything else, crypto, NFTs, that whole space is going to have privilege attached to it. However, the opportunities for success, I believe, are much more democratized in that world than they are in the one that we are coming from.
What do you... Yeah, let's do the environment thing, and then I think we'll go somewhere else after that.
Okay.
So proof of work versus proof of stake, like, there's this whole thing where people are critiquing Bitcoin, et cetera, for environmental catastrophe. And, while there's some truth to it, it's also in a transitional point that, I think we need to really be stomping on the gas right now with crypto. And it's okay if we bite off a little bit more carbon than we want to, because we're going to have the capacity to sort it out much better in short term. But, and then there's technological innovations that totally, 1/100th the energy required, like right around the corner for Ethereum. And I don't know what the math is for Bitcoin, but I'm sure people are looking at it. Like El Salvador, for instance, having all the volcanic activity they can power their servers with. So,
oh yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, you said it right there. It's the proof of work versus proof of stake. So right now it's in proof of work. That's a way more labor intensive process. It takes a lot more energy. Proof of stake, like you said, could reduce the amount of energy by over 90%. Ethereum, I believe this summer, is supposed to switch over to that new system.
Right.
But in the meantime, there's things that projects can do to offset their carbon. So the project I'm working on, we work with a group called Offsetra. They do carbon offsets for NFT projects, and our project is actually going to be carbon negative because we're using our offsets to do a reforestation project in the Amazon. So I think that until we're able to really offset the carbon the way we want, there are things that businesses can do to offset that. However, I'll also mention that let's think about how much energy the current financial system uses. Think about all
Yeah.
of the branches and ATMs and corporate centers and offices and all the computers in those offices. The amount of energy that it takes to power the physical banking system, the minting and the printing of the money and all of that, I would guess it probably exceeds what Ethereum's doing now.
I was told
You
by
know,
somebody recently the modern banking system uses as much energy as Europe does.
well, there you go.
Yeah.
There
So,
you go.
yeah. I would love to fact check that, but you know, in the interest of time, just know that there's a ton of waste, folks, in the modern industrial banking system.
Yes.
Yeah, and gross inequalities, and this is available on the cheapest cell phone, and it has been for a long time. And there's a
Yeah.
lot of hope for help in really difficult countries in difficult financial situations. In Africa, the unbanked can now transfer money
Yep.
quickly. So yeah, there's so much here. But let's talk about like psychedelics. Like what
Yeah.
could we do here with this technology and psychedelics? We can already buy drugs online and have them mailed to your house. But what else is coming?
So I see this opportunity as being one for community building. And, I live in California. I mean, I'm in a place where there's not a whole lot of stigma left around the use of psychedelics, around the use of cannabis, but I'm also in a bubble. And not too far away, there are states where talking about psychedelics, talking about cannabis, especially if you're a parent or if you are in a visible job, a high profile job, can be extremely dangerous. And so I think that, as you said, there's these communities that are forming in the Web3 space around NFT projects that bring together people from all over the world who want to be part of these plant medicine communities and want to be in it for good. So a lot of these projects donate back. One of the first projects I bought into was Psychedelics Anonymous. They have made donations to mental health and psychedelics research. And they have community from all over the world, people who live in places where psychedelics are still very much illegal, who are able to come to this community, ask questions, feel really free to talk about their psychedelic experiences, and feel completely safe doing so. And for marginalized, stigmatized communities, the idea of being able to feel completely safe inside that community is so important and was so paramount to the early medical cannabis days and was a huge center point of most of the early medical cannabis dispensaries.
Yeah, the fact that we have permissionless and uncensorable data now is a big deal. Like we can't be censored anymore if we do it right. It's permanent. It's there forever, and um, I just think that's a really big deal because we see so much censorship on the internet, and people might not understand even that they're being censored when they are. It might be by a business and not the government,
Right.
but there's still a lot going on there.
And also, people don't know how to get their questions answered directly. And they feel that everything is about trying to get them to buy something or do something. And the space that I have joined in, the community that I've joined in this kind of Web3 NFT space, and again, maybe it's a generational thing, but there's a lot of this feeling like they've been forsaken by the capitalistic industrial complex, and that the younger folks don't have money to buy a home, they can't find a job, they feel like nobody gives a shit about climate change and nobody gives a shit about gun control. And honestly, they feel like they can do better. And I remember feeling not so differently when I was in my 20s. But good, good. That's what we need. We need somebody who is young and mission driven to build the alternative that we're going to need in society. And I think psychedelics play a huge role in that evolution because for a lot of young folks, these are not stigmatized things. For a lot of young folks, these are things to fight for. These are things to educate people about in a way that I brazenly. So I think that this is a space where all of these things can happen. And then, interestingly enough, we also have the opportunity to create virtual reality experiences for these communities where they can get up close and personal with the plants, where they can go and see where these plants come from and who are the indigenous communities that have shepherded them through all of these decades of prohibition. And going back to that kind of conscious consumption discussion, I feel that having these immersive experiences around the actual plants themselves will help people be more mindful and conscious in their consumption. And that's really what we want for psychedelics. Psychedelics are not frivolous, they are important, and they deserve respect, and they deserve a mindfulness to their practice, not to say they aren't fun. But I think if we want to see a responsible adaptation of mass consumption of psychedelics in the world, it has to be paired with education and consciousness.
Mm. What kind of things would you like to train people on in kind of like a VR space or kind of private NFT type community?
I would like for people to be able to see and have sensory experiences with plants. I'm a teacher. I taught at Berkeley for over a decade. And one of the things that was always really important to me was delivering education through multiple senses. And it's maybe why I enjoyed museums so much as a kid, because I really believe that, yeah, you can sit and listen to someone talk about something, even if it's freaking fascinating. And it's still not going to be the same as actually physically touching something, smelling something, seeing something come alive in front of you. It just impacts the brain in a different way. So, what I would love to do is have guided tours in the virtual reality space of a sacred garden. We actually already have a Matterport scan of Bob's Garden in Oakland on our website. So, you can go there now and do a 3D tour of the garden and see the plants up close. But being able to be like on a guided tour in the Amazon where you're seeing these plants and it's being explained to you where they come from, I feel like that gives you more respect for consumption, just like meeting the cow who's going to be your hamburger.
Mm. Yeah, that's beautiful. Because how many people like even know what ayahuasca looks like in the jungle or in a, deliberately cultivated garden, right? Like very few.
Very few, or even cannabis. I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
shocking to me. I worked for a cannabis distributor up here in the Emerald Triangle for several years, and we would bring people through our processing facility. And a lot of people had never seen cannabis outside of a baggie or a jar. They had never seen it on the plant. They had never seen it before it was trimmed. And again, I liken it back to our food. Like, I want to know where this came from. And that is something that, we've lost a lot in our food supply that I don't want to lose in plant medicine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, or I guess we need to establish it because it's not even there. Like
Yeah, it's
it's
not even there.
yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, so I think that's beautiful, and I think this is the right time for it, given all of this kind of slow food movement attention, maybe. Yeah, there's a lot here and a lot of value we can bring to to people and to help educate them so that they are now protecting the ecosystems.
Right,
So
right.
maybe
Exactly.
even donating back to certain conservation projects before and after consumption, right?
Oh, I love that. I like an offering.
Mm-hmm.
So our the project that we're working on in the NFT space, we're working with Chacruna to be a beneficiary. And I think that's the kind of work that we want to bring to life, right? Is like kind of what's the connection between the plant and the community and the earth, and then how do we make that come alive with this new VR technology? That's what kind of where we're at. And I think if we can do this right and give the plants again the respect they deserve, we're going to allow these plants to be seen and experienced by so many more people than could do so in kind of a traditional, has to be in person kind of way.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Um, so, uh, what can you tell me about the project specifically that you're working on in NFTs?
Sure. So we're creating 3D scans of about 50 different entheogens. I work with an amazing virtual architect and developer. He's doing scans of the plants. Some of them he's creating from scratch. Some are actual scans that he did in Bob's garden of the actual plants. And then we're creating them as NFTs as a membership token, basically, to our sacred garden community. So people that hold these NFTs will be invited to in real life events, virtual events, We're going to have merchandise. We'll be sending them seeds and cuttings of entheogenic plants. And then we're creating a community treasury. So moving forward, people will be able to vote on how we donate the funds, what projects we work with. And, again, it's cultivating a community of people who are passionate about entheogen conservation and cultivation, and then giving them a way to find each other and to come together and not feeling like there's any barrier based on where you live or what the laws are, but that we can all meet together in this virtual space in order to experience these plants.
Is there any talk at all about like a legal defense fund through NFT stuff?
So that's really interesting. I think the DAO phenomena is where we're going to see a lot of the fundraising happen. So DAO is a decentralized autonomous organization. It's basically an alternative to a corporate structure where everybody that is a member gets to vote on what happens with the money, with the future, basically everything. And so DAOs have popped up as ways to quickly raise a bunch of money for a certain cause or mission. One that people may have heard of was the US Constitution DAO, when they had this idea they were going to buy the Constitution, and it raised something like $16 million. I mean, it was just obscene. So from my perspective, we could start a Psychedelics Defense Fund DAO, and that would just go to help people that have been incarcerated or interacting with the criminal justice system because of psychedelics. The community could vote on how the money is specifically used or specific programs. But what you could do is you could ask other projects that have a psychedelic mission if they would be willing to donate a certain percentage of their community treasury to the Legal Defense DAO. And then if their community votes yes, they would do it. So I think that there's a lot of opportunities to connect the dots and to bring together like-minded projects behind one main cause.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's really hopeful because again, people think often they need permission to do big things like this, and this shows that you don't need permission, folks. It's okay
Joe,
to do
there are
you.
12-year-olds out there right now who have made millions of dollars trading NFTs. 12-year-olds. So yes,
Right.
this is something you can do. It just takes a little bit of learning. And I'll tell folks on our website, which is SACRDGARDN.com. It's basically Sacred Garden without the E's. We have a frequently asked questions tab, and we go through all the basics of what are NFTs, what is crypto, how do I set up a wallet, what is a blockchain, what does minting mean? Because we really want to educate folks first and foremost. So I would encourage people, if you're like, I don't understand this world, but I kind of want to know, to check that out. Because honestly, Joe, I kind of feel like my parents did when the internet was invented. And I feel like I'm not old enough to just say, I'm not learning this, forget it, I'm just going to go retire. So, I got to learn it. You got to learn it. We all got to learn it.
Right. It's yeah, and so I'll do a little conspiracy thinking for you and explain this. So like people are seeing NFTs get a ton of attention, but a ton of hate at the same time. And the hate is coming kind of from a lot of centralized sources. And, why is it that all of the critiques are around money laundering and like climate? I think because it's partly like a super easy thing for centralized authority to critique. And
Oh yeah, they're
get a lot of buy-in.
buzzwords. Oh yeah, I
Totally.
mean, nobody wants anything that's harming the environment. Everybody wants people to pay what they make and not be able to keep money for themselves that they don't deserve. I mean, those are very, very popular buzzwords. So I could absolutely see that happening. And I think, there is a lot of pushback around NFTs and Web3 and crypto. But honestly, I think part of it is just human nature. People are tired and they're busy and they're stressed out. And when being presented with a whole new thing that they have to learn and understand and interact with, really the easiest thing for our brains to do is say, that's stupid. You don't need to know about that. Just move on. And I
Mm,
get it. And I know that right now there's early adopters, and we're probably a few years out from it really being mass adopted. But it is coming. And so, I really don't see us changing course with this. But I do think it will evolve, and people will get on board in their own time.
totally. Yeah. And I think concert tickets are going to be like one of the first gateways here, because I'm sure a lot of these groups are going to be doing tickets on their centralized blockchains. So we're going to see what that's like.
Oh yeah, no
Um,
more Ticketmaster. They're done with Ticketmaster, right? They're like, I'm not the and no, so are we. The
they're awful.
fees and everything. So like if I could just go and buy an NFT to a concert on the blockchain from the band, I would much rather do that.
Right. And, perpetually support the artist as opposed to a large uh, organization barely adding value back.
Exactly.
And, yeah, like say, yeah, there's just so much application for psychedelics with crypto. There was that conference ages ago, Crypto Psychedelic. I think Mike Margulies was the mastermind there. Um, a little jealous I didn't get to go, but I think it's just good that was happening. I have some interest in doing something similar, but I have to get through a few smaller things first. Um, that whole intersection of software, just kind of this leave me alone or we're going to make our own community kind of ethic is super important.
Oh yeah, and I mean we're seeing it in a time when there's a actual need for people to think about what communities they're going to make and keep. And talking about again growing your own medicine, um, I would encourage people to know how to grow your own medicine and your own food, know how to preserve food, know how to preserve your medicine. These are times when self sufficiency is more than just a fad. It's pretty important. So I think that we're part of this evolution of people not only thinking about where's the source of this and what's the impact of my actions as a consumer, but also thinking about what is my ability to survive if supply chains break down, if things get too expensive. And, being able to grow your own medicine and have your own mental health care taken care of is a very, very empowering thing.
My co-founder Kyle Buller was at a retreat with Kat Harrison ages ago in Hawaii, and they were talking about, okay, like here's all the essentials. What happens when the ships stop showing up? Like, do you know how to make rope? Like all these kind of basic survivalist things. And we just had this little flash of, what, $18 a gallon gasoline in California or whatever. It's an exaggeration, folks, but like
It's
why
close.
yeah, I bet. I bet. And one war between two countries and this is the result is like that. And who's to say that's not going to happen? And what happens to ships that need to come across the ocean as a result? And everything else is, yeah.
Well, I think that also speaks to why people are so into decentralization. Because, when you put all of your eggs in one corporate basket and then that basket breaks, you're pretty much screwed. I mean, when we have all of our faith and our money and our well being tied up in gigantic institutions, they are not infallible. They
Mm-hmm.
can fail. And so being able to have more of a control over your own assets and how those assets are protected, it's not anything that's super revolutionary. In fact, I would say it more goes back to the days of yore when people were more suspicious about large institutions wanting their information and wanting their money and wanting us to put faith in them, and were more comfortable with local community sharing and community based medicine and food and healthcare. So perhaps we're seeing a bit of a return to that.
Mm, that would be pretty cool. I'd love to see that. Yeah, I'm also a student of permaculture, so like this whole ideology is just so interlinked for me
Mm-hmm.
in that frame. So yeah, like just so much overlap. And in psychedelics, we should be able to see this. Like, what if we're able to fund our own clinical trials that nobody's been able to fund yet, and not necessarily rely on VCs or anything that might go
Well,
against where we want to
funny
go?
that you should mention that, Joe,
Mm.
Because, I mentioned Dr. Sue Sisley earlier and the fact that
Hmm.
she is, federally approved researcher and grower of cannabis and mushrooms. She has moved the whole plant of cannabis through phase 1 and phase 2 clinical trials. And the only thing she has left is phase 3 trials. They are very expensive. They're like $100 million. She cannot get any cannabis company, even the big, huge conglomerates, to pay or to give money for the purpose of continuing this research. She cannot get the government to give her money for the purpose of continuing this research. So, going back to that DAO model, one of the things that my company has been considering, and of course, the legalities of this are like talk about a landmine. Um, but the idea of could we do a DAO where people could fund phase 3 clinical trials for cannabis, funded by the people. And what that would do is it would give the ownership of the IP of that cannabis to the people. They would own it. It wouldn't be owned by a private entity. It wouldn't be owned by the federal government. It would be owned by the people. And any dividends that come from that product, insurance, all of that would go to the fund. So it's very interesting. We are, like I said, we're looking into it. The legality, very tough because cannabis is federally illegal and DAOs are still kind of gray area. But this is kind of the utility I see for these issues related to psychedelics and cannabis that we just have not had success getting government support, getting private support, but that the people really, really want to see it happen. So, can we bring the power of this back into the hands of the community? And oh my goodness, what would it look like if we could?
Mm. Extraordinary, right? It's like an anarchist's dream in a way for like direct
Yeah,
democracy, and it requires a lot, but it's also I think what is required right now, um, unless we want to let Bezos and Musk drive the ship forever, which is
no,
probably not what we want.
no,
So let's take the power back, and this is it, right?
this is
And
it.
there's massive implications for the psychedelic world. We can fund all the lobbyists we would ever want through this technology. There's just so much left. So
There
thank
is.
you for being so involved. I didn't know we were going to talk about NFTs for so long. I'm psyched. I still have never bought one. Full disclosure, as of March 18th, 2022. Uh, I've been curious, but yeah, just haven't, for whatever reason. Yeah, work distracts me from learning. Right. So the
Well,
people with all
once
the time.
when we drop our collection, which will likely be April, we'll gift you one.
Oh, beautiful,
There you
beautiful.
go. That'll be your
Oh, I'd love
first.
it. Yeah, cool. So, anything else people should know about your work?
Well, I mean, my work has always been looking at the connection between the people, the plants, and then greater society. And, it's been very interesting over the past 20 years to watch the evolution of how society feels about first cannabis and then psychedelic plants. And it's not going back in the other direction. Now, in policy, a lot of the times we talk about a pendulum that swings back and forth. And you have these periods of really progressive politics, so that it swings back, and you have these periods of really conservative politics. And we saw the same thing with drugs. In the 1970s, we got fairly close to decriminalization of cannabis, except Carter's aide had a cocaine problem, and so we didn't get to do that, unfortunately. And then it swung back in the other direction in the 80s and 90s with Reagan and Bush's. And then we saw it swing back. And a lot of people are asking, well, is it going to swing back in the other direction? I think for politics in general, we probably will see that because that's a pattern that's emerged for as long as we've had politics. But I don't think drugs are going back. I don't think we're going back. I think it's too late. I think that the support, I mean, I was just looking at the latest Pew Research figures yesterday, and only 8% of the entire population thinks cannabis should be illegal.
Good Lord. That's
So
great
we're
news.
we're done, right? And I think now that we're done with cannabis, it's tugging on the thread of questioning about other drugs. And when I first started doing reform work, people would say, "Oh, you just want to legalize cannabis because you really just want to legalize all drugs." And you know what, Joe? I do. I do want to legalize all drugs.
Same. Same.
And I think we're getting there. I think we're questioning the utility of the criminal justice system, fighting back against the revenue that comes from private prisons is really, really difficult, but we're doing it. I think that we've got a lot of young, bright politicians coming on the scene. Gary Chambers in Louisiana. I mean, folks that are just trying to burn down the current way that we work with people who use substances. So I'm very, very optimistic. I think the biggest threat is going to be keeping that progress from evolving into industrialized food. If we can find a different path, and maybe it's through virtual reality and giving people exposure to these plants so that they want to see them in natural form and not in some consumer packaged good at Walmart, maybe that's the way. But it's going to be very difficult to fight against the forces of capitalism. And I would encourage people out there who really care about the future of the plants and what the plants need in order to thrive and survive, that we start paying attention to that perspective. I don't really work for people. I work for the plants. And the work that I do is 100% motivated by what I think will be best for them.
Love that. I love that. And what does that mean? So like just largely what you said, this non-industrial kind of brutal system.
Yeah, well, I mean, it means freedom. It means freedom to grow something in the ground and put it in your mouth. I mean, it's really plain and simple. It means getting to experience the plant in as natural state as possible and having the natural state be accessible. It means favoring methods of cultivation that are better for the environment. I mean, oh my gosh, people, buy sun-grown cannabis for goodness sake. I mean, I'll tell you a little market secret. It's way cheaper than anything else you're going to find in the dispensary. But oh my gosh, it's so much better. It's better taste, it's better effect, and it's way better for the environment. So I think if we want
California has in dispensaries outdoor grown.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
That's interesting. I haven't seen that advertised specifically in Colorado at a dispensary.
They do not have it in Colorado. Colorado's all indoor. So what I'm saying is, like, if you care about and you want to do right by the plants, if you live someplace where they don't allow outdoor, advocate for that. Say, hey, how come we're not growing our plants outside? Isn't that better for the environment? And isn't it better for the plants? So those are the kinds of policies that I think really honor the plant, how it's grown, where it's grown, and ensuring that people have access to that personal relationship and also have access to plants in their most natural form.
That's beautiful. Cool. So, Amanda, is there anything else you want to get out for my audience to hear about before we wrap here?
I think that's about it. I will say that, I'm always happy to chat with folks who have questions about cannabis or psychedelics, especially for the use of these substances to help reduce the use of other substances. My research has focused primarily on the use of cannabis as a substitute for opiates, alcohol, and other drugs. So I'm very much into the harm reduction model of using psychedelic plants to help alleviate harms from other substances. So I will tell folks, my email, if you don't mind me sharing it, is amanda@mypersonalplants.com. If you are, this sounds like a commercial, even though I don't charge any money, but if you or someone is curious about how to use cannabis or other psychedelic medicines as a substitute or as a harm reduction tool, please reach out. I'm always happy to give guidance. I'm a PhD, I'm not a medical doctor, but I am a researcher, and I'm happy to share with people what the research says. And I'm also a social worker. So from a treatment perspective, I'm happy to give people guidance about that as well.
Beautiful. And yeah, thank you for your well thought out commentary, really well put together critique and vision around what this commercial and social sharing future could look like. And there's so much left to do here. So thanks for playing a part, Amanda. It's been super fun getting to know you and excited to watch and hopefully contribute.
Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed being here today, Joe.